Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be taking a look at some of the underexplored restricted Pokemon that may actually have a spot in the metagame. Now when I say they have a spot, I'm not necessarily these guys are going to be the best of the best, but maybe we were too harsh on them when analyzing the metagame a little earlier on. We're going to kick this list off with Dialga, specifically Dialga Origin. Keep in mind, a lot of things I am going to say about this Pokemon do apply to the base form of Dialga as well. However, today we're going to mainly focus on the origin form. And starting off with this Adamant Crystal, and that's that Steel and Dragon type boost as well. You do have to run this item if you want to run the Dialga Origin, which is one of the big drawbacks to it. However, similar to the masks of the Ogerpon, you do get that 1.2 times power boost to your Steel and Dragon moves in this case. And I think that is something that makes this Pokemon somewhat good and somewhat bad at the same time. I feel like with Ogerpon, you don't have to waste that restricted slot for it. So it becomes like, yeah, it's okay, you don't need the item. Dialga, I feel like, may need the item elsewhere. However, taking advantage of that 1.2 is where you're going to start with your Dialga, right? You're definitely starting with Flash Cannon. You're definitely starting with either Draco Meteor, Dragon Pulse, whatever dragon move of choice that you may have. And then after that, honestly, Dialga is a very good Pokemon at setting up Trick Room, right? Its abilities aren't amazing. Telepathy is very, very cool if you wanted to pair it with something like a Ursaluna Hisui. We saw a little bit of those in Regulation G where it was like, oh, you get into Trick Room and then you just spam Earthquake sort of thing, right? That is definitely a possibility and something you can do with Dialga. I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe something like Dialga Miraidon and then you're spamming Specs Discharge. Beside like a Telepathy Dialga in this format, that could definitely be a cool concept moving forward. But also, I do want to give a quick shout out to Pressure. In a format where a lot of these restricted Pokemon have their signature moves, a lot of these signature moves only work with 8 PP, right? And that's assuming they've maxed them out, right? So you can actually take advantage of Pressure in this format where, I don't know, something like a Surging Strikes from an Urshifu goes into you, all of a sudden it can only hit you 4 times. If they hit you 4 times, they no longer have that move. A real big thing here I think I want to talk about is something like the Astral Barrage. And if you can pressure stall that, because it has to hit both targets, right? With the Surging Strikes or the single target ones, they don't have to hit into your Dialga, and they can have a little bit more not get pressure stalled that way. However, with these spread moves, they kind of have to hit into the pressure at some point. So if you can find a way to have the longevity with the Dialga on the board, I think that's something that's very, very strong and potentially great moving forward. This is one of the big reasons back in past formats I've liked Assault Vest Dialga. Obviously, you can't do that on the Dialga Origin, so that's one of the, I guess, upticks to having the base form Dialga instead, right? And then you just get a crazy amount of coverage moves, and you have that longevity with that Assault Vest, especially versus the special restricteds, which is very nice to see. Overall, though, like I said, absolutely crazy strong move pool here. You get stuff like Aura Sphere, you get Blizzard. Well, I don't know why you would run Blizzard on Dialga, but I guess if you wanted to, you absolutely could. Body Press is kind of cool. I believe you get Iron Defense as well. I mean, Iron Defense, Body Press stuff, I feel like if you're going to do that with a Steel type restricted, you're going to do that with Zamazenta. So I think we got to find a different niche for Dialga, but it is definitely something you can do, and I did want to mention it. Right? Once again, similar to the concept of like stalling out the Astral Barrages. If you get pressure, Iron Defense up, you pair that with something like a Pressure. By the time they actually break through you, they're gonna be out of. Power. Hit points. I get no, not hit points. What's it called? Bruh. They're gonna be out of PP, right? Like they're just gonna be out of moves. They're not going to be they're not going to be able to hit you, right? And I think that's definitely something to look at. But I think what you want to do with this form of Dialga is go on a little bit more of the aggressive approach, right? So Telepathy, if it's warranted, you can use it. If you don't have anything that you need Telepathy for, Pressure, very, very strong. But back to the move pool, Earth Power, very, very strong. Fire move, Flamethrower, Fire Blast, whichever you choose, very, very strong as well. And I believe you get Steel Beam as well if you just wanted to kind of go out with a bang sort of thing. Right? Yeah, you do get Steel Beam if you just wanted to go out with a bang, right? Lots of cool tech moves. You get Thunder as well if you're going to use this as a Kyogre counter. This is a very good option here too, right? Just a lot of options from Dialga. And then, of course, you got your classic, your Trick Room that you probably want to be on this Pokemon more often than not. The problem is you run out of moves, I find, with Dialga, right? You want your Flash Cannon, you want your Draco Meteor, you want your Trick Room, you want your Protect, but you also really want that coverage move. So the question becomes, what are you okay giving up? And it just seems to be that's one of the things that as well that works against this Pokemon. I still think there's a niche for it. Terra type, you get to go something like Fairy, Ghost, both of which are very, very viable. And my problem with Dialga as a Steel type restricted, at least right now, is it's a Steel type restricted. And it's kind of always been the case where Dialga wants to be that Steel type restricted because Steel Dragon is a phenomenal typing. It just always seems that there's a better Steel type restricted to fill that slot in the metagame. Right now, we currently have Zamazenta, right? Zamazenta is the Steel restricted of choice more often than not. Zacian picking up in usage as well in Regulation I just kind of doesn't do Dialga too many favors, right? Like if I'm going to pick a Steel type restricted, I want one of the better ones generally. I do think Dialga may have a niche, and generally speaking with Dialga, you do want to pair it with some of the more broken restricteds, right? When you start using these quote-unquote less good restricteds or these more niche restricteds, generally as a starting point, you want to hit them and you want to pair them with those broken ones, right? So generally with Dialga in the past, we saw Kyogre, which I still think is phenomenal. Kyogre plus Steel type restricted, going to be phenomenal. It's going to be well built, especially if you close it out properly. Cores like that are generally always going to work. I think that's where Dialga, you would want to see Dialga in this metagame. However, like I said before, I think pairing it with like a Miraidon and sending Discharge could be very, very cool outside of the obvious ground weakness, right? That would be the big issue I would have there. However, I think a concept like that could be cool if you can, figure that out moving forward, right? You also have, I think Cali Shadow is a pretty good one. I think Cali Ice, I think both the Calorexes deserve a shout out here, right? Dialga doesn't like ground. Cali Ice, just covers that super, super well. Two Pokemon that want Trick Room that can utilize Trick Room. Maybe you would be able to not put Trick Room here, have a Tech move because you have your Trick Room on your other restrict. You don't need both your restricted to have Trick Room, right? So you also open the door that way. That could be cool as well. A little bit of a slower core. And I don't know, there is something here, right? It beats the mirror, right? Because like Flash Cannon should be hitting the opposing Calyrex pretty hard, right? Beats pretty much, kind of scares off Miraidon as well. Obviously, you resist the big electric attacks, which is where a majority of the damage comes from. And then you're forcing them to maybe click a Draco Meteor, which I don't know if you can live that. I feel like you're dying to Specs Draco Meteor. You do get that extra 20 over into the Spadef. But I don't think that's enough. But you can always Terra out of it with like a Terra Fairy if you wanted to. Or honestly, just if they're clicking Draco Meteor, they're not clicking the electric move. And then you can have maybe like your own Fairy type in the back. Scare them out that way. You have redirection on a composition like this as well. Like if you do something like Dialga, Calyrex Ice, you're scaring off opposing Miraidon now. And that seems pretty good, right? Then you're generally going to put this with something like an Amoonguss, an Incineroar. And all of a sudden, you just have a good core. Like, this looks like a perfectly fine team. I would not want to play this at a local if I went up versus it, right? So, this is what I like about double restricted, right? Like, Dialga, I think it's very obvious it's not one of the best restricteds in the game. However, you get to do this, and you pair it with a really good restricted that kind of complements it well. And all of a sudden, hey, this team's actually kind of looking a little scary, right? Like, you're going to be able to compete. You're going to be able to find these niche cores. And that's really what I wanted to kind of shout out with some of these other restricteds that can be those pieces. That's probably going to be it for Dialga, guys. I'm not going to get too much into spreads. That's really just going to depend on how you want to approach the game, how you want to approach building your teammates with it. And of course, I will do more spreads as well once the metagame kind of develops a little bit, guys, but it's so early. This is really just kind of an in theory kind of video, and that's pretty much where we're going to hit with Dialga for now. Moving on, we're going to take a look at Ho-Oh, and this Pokemon is one of those ones that, like I said in other videos and past videos, every single time we get a new restricted format, everybody goes, wow, this is Ho-Oh's season. This is Ho-Oh's time to shine. Once again, I've heard it a lot this time as well, where they're like, yo, Ho-Oh actually is kind of good. And I do kind of see it this time. Once again, it does very interesting, surprisingly well into the Zamazenta Cali Shadow stuff, because it just has that naturally special defensive stat where you're able to take the Calyrex damage. And then you have just the natural resist to the Zamazenta stuff. So like in theory, it does do very good jobs of breaking out that top restricted core, which is very, very strong. My issue with Ho-Oh, however, it just doesn't have that it factor. You know, I feel like all the quote-unquote broken restricteds and why we end up sleeping on Ho-Oh is because every broken restricted, every like disgusting one that's really, really good is broken. Calorexes both get the disgusting spread moves and the stat boosts, right? And they're very well min-maxed, right? Cali Shadow super, super fast, hits super hard. Cali Ice super, super slow, hits super hard, right? So you're able to function it and you're able to immediately see where this Pokemon should be used. In terms of Ho-Oh, you don't get that broken stat. Right? Nothing here is inherently broken outside of your, 154 Spadef. Pretty good, right? If that was in like attack, this Pokemon would be probably broken, right? It just doesn't have that it factor. It doesn't have the broken spread move. It's got Sacred Fire, which is probably one of its better options. But then you're still gambling on that 50-50 to burn. You also have to hit the move first, which... And I mean, I don't know about you, but my experience with Ho-Oh and Sacred Fire in general is I'm missing that move more than I'm burning that move, which is kind of sad, but maybe I'm just an unlucky person. But overall, you do get a nice little clear amulet boost. And now that you're not the only restricted on the field, and you can pair this Pokemon with one of the broken ones, I think this actually potentially may be a meta where Ho-Oh isn't necessarily good, but it definitely could be a nice little counter pick to some of the popular cores in the metagame, like that Cala Shadow Zamazenta, right? And obviously Regenerator, going to be a very good ability, right? So you can kind of go in, take a few hits, hit something hard, maybe burn something, switch out, come back in later and be healthy again. It's a very interesting concept for this Pokemon. My issue is I don't know what I would pair it with. It's just kind of there. Right? Like I said before, you get great options like Sacred Fire. You get very cool options like very consistent Brave Bird. And Brave Bird into stuff like the Urshifu, the Rillaboom. And when you have a clear amulet, you break in Cinderella Ursh. Outside of the fact, that Ursh is hitting you hard and murdering you. But, you can hit the Urshifu back. So if you can get position where maybe you get to go ahead and Terra, right? And you don't necessarily need to. You can actually break through that Urshifu on the other end okay as well. Especially if you go like Terra Grass or Terra Dragon, both two things that I have seen on Ho-Oh in early testing, right? I think my issue with Ho-Oh is like then you want to kind of just go Tailwind, but then my Tailwind's on my restricted, and then you want Protect as well because there's going to be turns where you don't really want to be hit. So you just kind of don't have, similar to that Dialga, you don't have that broken option, and then you also want coverage and support at the same time, and finding a room for that is very, very difficult. But however, I think on the right team, this Pokemon could be good, right? You want coverage. I don't know what coverage you would want per se in this case, right? Like there's really not that much that I would do here in terms of coverage, right? Recover could be cool. It's been something in the past, but with Regenerator now, you may not need Recover. Scorching Sands is funny, but you're not going to use it, right? You're going to go on the physical side, right? You do get 110 special attack. Don't do it, guys. Do not run special Ho-Oh. I made a joke on stream where I was like, oh, we can run like overheat on Ho-Oh and really destroy the Zamazentas. And I think people started to take me seriously. Please do not run special Ho-Oh. I don't think it's good. The 130 attack is, like I said, you really wanted to benefit off this Sacred Fire and this Brave Bird. That's really what you want. Upon further review, maybe you don't need the coverage. Maybe this is just the correct Ho-Oh moveset. And with Clear Amulet, it's honestly pretty solid, right? So I'm curious to see if maybe this actually does become a thing. Because like I said, it doesn't have that natural firepower, right? You pair this with, like, I've heard people talk about Groudon with Ho-Oh. I think that's pretty good. We used to have the anti-meta teams with the Groudon Ho-Oh that would be around, right? Like that sun boosted Ho-Oh. I think that's generally the concept that we end up seeing. I'm not a huge fan. I think if I'm going to put sun on Ho-Oh, I'm going to run Groudon with it. So, but I did want to give Groudon that shout out. I've seen a few Terapagos Ho-Oh teams. I really don't know what's going on there. I'm going to be honest. I guess Ho-Oh in theory gets the Sacred Fire, can deal with the Zamazenta, burn off the Zamazenta, scare off those fighting types in the format. Like in theory it makes sense, right? Like I'll put it on the thing here, right? Terapagos doesn't like the fighting types. Ho-Oh, of course, naturally does beat those fighting types with the Brave Bird, right? So it's very interesting, and then anything that like big physical attackers, after you get a Calm Mind up our Terapagos' problem, you burn them with the Sacred Fire, right? I see the combination here. I just feel that, like, yes, Terapagos is probably one of the, I hate to say it, one of the better restricteds in the format right now. And I hate to say it, because I was going to put Terapagos on this list, but I think it's done enough to not be on this list. I don't know. Ho-Oh does technically support Terapagos well. It just feels like Terapagos is at the bottom of the quote-unquote good restricteds, and then Ho-Oh, you're trying to use Ho-Oh with a lesser of the better restricteds. Like, I don't know. I want to pair Ho-Oh with the broken things, right? Especially with the Dialga. But like when I pair it with the broken things, it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Like the Calorexes are the broken Pokemon. Miraidon is the broken Pokemon. Miraidon Ho-Oh might be interesting actually, because then you have Ho-Oh to beat like the grass types like that Rillaboom that wants to be on the field. In fact, that's almost something I would be interested in trying out. Is like something like Ho-Oh Miraidon, right? You have the ground immunity now. One's physical, one's special. You break the grass types that Miraidon doesn't like to see that's going to set terrain. My only issue with a core like this would be Ice Rider, right? And I feel like a lot of the times, but anything I pair Ho-Oh with that I want to pair Ho-Oh with doesn't necessarily like Ice Rider, so maybe that's up to the rest of the slots. A lot of options here for Ho-Oh. I don't think it's ever going to be that, yeah, this Pokemon is super meta, but similar to the Dialga, I think it could be a very cool counter pick, especially into the CSR Zamazenta stuff. That's kind of taken the format by storm right now. It is by far that best team. And Ho-Oh maybe does something. Like, in theory, it wants to be there. I don't know if it does enough, but in theory, it does want to be there. So I'm curious if Ho-Oh holds out. All right, guys, it's time to start talking about Groudon. It is time to start talking about Groudon. And normally what we see with Groudon is we see it become very, very strong in past restricted formats. It's historically been fantastic. Hasn't seen much play in Regulation G. Does it see play in Regulation I? I'm still not a huge believer in Groudon right now. Especially because a lot of the times, Groudon was used as that restricted, that like, you know what? If I'm missing my Precipice Blades, I'm still setting Sun. It doesn't feel too bad. I've still supported, you know, the rest of my team where I maybe have a Chlorophyll user in past. Or nowadays, you know, you're pairing the thing and you're supporting that Flutter Mane. You're giving yourself the Proto Boost there. You're supporting the Raging Bolt, right? You're supporting pieces like this, even if necessarily you aren't necessarily doing the damage because maybe you've missed your Precipice Blades. However, there's a better way to do that, in my opinion, right now, to get the support on these guys, and that's Koraidon. Koraidon just feels a little bit more consistent, seems to be doing a lot better off than Groudon is in these formats, and like I said, normally you'd be okay because you'd get to have, oh, okay, Groudon is not the greatest Pokemon, but I'm setting some Sun for some of my supporting options, and it feels really, really good. However, you can do the supporting Sun for better options now with a Koraidon, and Groudon isn't that option anymore. I still think there's a niche for it. Obviously, Miraidon, very, very good in the metagame. And I think Groudon is going to be that kind of anti-meta pick. It's going to be good. I think it'll be decent. I'm not saying it's going to win regionals, but I do think something like that Groudon Lunala core that has been floating around, it's been picking up in usage. Groudon Shadow Rider as well. Those are kind of where you see Groudon. And I think that's just correct for it, right? Like, obviously, you're going to be running Clear Amulet or Assault Vest here. I am tempted to say Clear Amulet is better. Assault Vest seems to be a little bit better off on some of these supporting options here. But Clear Amulet, very, very strong. Not getting intimidated. And if you're connecting this move, you are winning games. It's quite simple. You will find ways to win games with Groudon if you are connecting your Precipice Blades. Likewise, though, you're also going to be finding ways to lose games if you are clicking Precipice Blades. It's simple. It's unfortunate. That similar has that issue with Kyogre, right? Where it's just, you know, you're going to miss your moves. And if you're okay missing your moves, it might be okay. My problem is with this being my ground type is that it's a ground type that doesn't love Zamazenta, right? And you'd want Groudon, you'd want your ground type restricted to match up well into the big steel type restricted in the format, right? That is what I'd want from this piece. Now, yeah, it can do okay, right? The body press is probably doing less than half, like probably 45-ish if you're EVing your Groudon properly, right? I wouldn't know what the spread is. I haven't really looked too far into Groudon yet, but you know, but you're doing damage back. But now you all of a sudden, if you're running only Precipice Blades as your ground move, it's, well, they could just click Wide Guard, and now Precipice Blades kind of sucks. I could miss, so I could take 45, miss, and then, you know, and I'm not killing it, because of that defense boost that Zamazenta gets immediately. So that's a little bit problematic there. You could, of course, go for something like a high horsepower for that single target option, right? But then you'd have to go like Heat Crash and Protect, right? Which is definitely fair. You could 100% do this. It's a solid set, right? It just feels a little lackluster. It doesn't have that wow factor, you know, like the Calorexes, and I'm going to keep comparing it to the Calorexes to that Miraidon. The Miraidon stacks the multipliers. It does so much damage. It's disgusting, right? The Calyrex and both of them just can stack and get the steamroll going. Groudon doesn't have that, right? And that's the case for a lot of these restricted. And I know I sound like a broken record at this point. However, it's just the Precipice Blades for me right now isn't enough of an upside to justify using it. However, pairing this thing with, like I said before, that Calyrex Shadow, if I could type, would be fantastic. I don't want to pair Groudon with Clamperl. Anyways, that Calyrex Shadow or that Lunala, I think these are where you're looking at going here. Like, personally, and then, in my opinion, it's Ogerpon Fire, right? You pick one of the two Ghost Restricteds, and then you pair it with Ogerpon Fire. I'll do this for now. I think Lunala Groudon has a little bit more leeway because you just get the speed control with Lunala, and you kind of have these two mediocre restricteds, but when paired together, they put up a lot of pressure onto opponents, right? Because Lunala Groudon, in theory, historically, has been phenomenal. And in theory, this time, it should be decent again, right? You've got some middling speed tiers, right? You can actually go Tailwind on Lunala if you really wanted to. I recommend Trick Room as the speed control option here, right? We're not going to start breaking into Lunala, though. But overall, like Groudon, Lunala, Ogerpon, I think is a very, very solid option. And you're supporting Ogerpon in a way where you're not stacking weaknesses to that flying, right? I feel like that's my issue when I put Ogerpon Fire on Koraidon teams, is that like Koraidon, Lunala, Ogerpon is great, but then all of a sudden you play something and they have like a flying type, and all of a sudden I have to bring my Lunala, my other two big pieces in the sun lose to flying types. That gets kind of iffy there. Right, so I think Groudon might be a very nice option for the Ogerpon Fire and enabling the Ogerpon Fire Lunala combination. I think Groudon is a very cool concept there. Overall, lots to say about Groudon, guys. It's kind of back and forth on is it actually good. It really just depends on if you're hitting your blades. But I think there's a concept here. There's probably other concepts as well that I have missed, guys. The concept of this video is just kind of to give ideas for some of these underrated restricteds, and hopefully that's what we're grabbing here from this Groudon. Eternatus, guys, and this is one that I really didn't want to put on the list because I really don't know if it's actually truly viable. Pressure, by the way, still a good ability. We went over it with the Dialga, where a lot of these big pieces have only so many limited options, right? Their moves only have like 8 PP, so you can kind of stall them out pretty good. You have your defensive stats, like 140 HP, 95 is solid, right? If you wanted to boost that and go with the Cosmic Power, you can definitely do that and just get a boost in both your defenses. That's a cool option. But like, I would play Eternatus a lot more aggressively. I feel like everybody plays this Pokemon passively. But every time we see this Pokemon have success, it's like that Choice Specs beside the Steel type, which is definitely something you can go ahead and do, like Choice Specs Sludge Wave beside that Steel type. I think that's definitely an option for this Pokemon. But you don't even necessarily need to do that. I think what Eternatus does very, very well is just supports and takes care of all the supports in the format, right? Incin doesn't like seeing this Pokemon. Rillaboom doesn't like seeing this Pokemon. Urshifu doesn't like seeing this Pokemon. Those are the 3 Pokemon that are supporting every other restricted combo in the game, right? Those 3 alone pretty much could be on any other restricted combination, and you are beating all 3 of them. And I think that's something that goes unnoticed when you have this Pokemon, is that everybody's just like, oh, I'm going to try and be bulky. I'm going to try and, you know, sit around. And that's fine. That's a decent strategy. I do want to take a moment and say that this offensive strategy does break a lot of these defensive cores. You know, you got Sludge Bomb, which is massive. The poison type coverage is huge into those grass types. You've got, you know, big Dynamax Cannon, which is just 100 powered dragon move. That's pretty solid, right? Not a lot wants to resist that. Oh, you have a fairy type? Sorry, Sludge Bomb, right? So just the poison dragon coverage alone is very good. and then you're just a coverage machine, right? Like you can go Flamethrower if you want. You get Flash Cannon. You're not going to use it, but you do get it. Was that a flying move? Am I crazy? Why do you get Fly? Hold on, that's totally irrelevant and makes no sense. And don't use it, but it's kind of funny that it gets Fly. Speaking of coverage machine, right? I believe you also get you get Meteor Beam if you wanted to do like a Power Herb Meteor Beam set to really pressure those Incineroars off the field and get yourself a +1. That's kind of a cool concept there as well, right? Shadow Ball if you wanted to have some fun versus Cali Shadow and force them to Terra, right? You get a lot of options here. Terra Blast is another option as well, depending on what you decide to go with there, right? I'm still shocked that you get Fly. I still cannot get over the fact that you get Fly. You get Solar Beam as well. Not that you would need it, but if you wanted to pair this with like a Sun Core and put Solar Beam, you could. But overall, right, you just kind of put on pressure, right? And Sludge Bomb Dynamax Cannon on their own is very good. I think Flamethrower is definitely something you're considering all the time, especially with Zacian and Zamazenta, those guys being in the core in the game. I think Flamethrower to break through those steel types that would generally wall you out is very, very strong. Right, like just Sludge Bomb, Dynamax Cannon, and Flamethrower alone, those 3 coverage moves are huge. They hit things super hard because it's coming off of a base 145 special attack stat, which I think a lot of people forget when they think Eternatus. And I think that's something that I really want to shout out in this core. Like, I don't think Eternatus is going to really be breaking metagames anytime soon. I don't think it's going to be winning regionals, but I think it should be able to pull out a few decent results if you can get it right, because a lot of people tend to sleep on this Pokemon, and like I said, it breaks a lot of the cores around common restricteds. Now, using your restricted to break non-restricted seems a little weird. However, if you can use this restricted to break the non-restricted supports, that would generally cause whatever other restricted you put here problems, could be a huge opening for Eternatus as your last core. And I think what you're going to want to do, like I said, similar with all the other ones, you want to pair this with the broken ones, right? Once again, I could see Eternatus beside Miraidon. It does break the grass types. My concern would be like the Dialga. You have that huge ground weakness that you're now going to have to find a way to patch. However, I could definitely see something like that. I could see it beside a steel restricted. Maybe Eternatus Zamazenta, right? Now you get Wide Guard. You get big damage off with Body Press. You get Sludge Bomb. Not the ideal core, but you could also go like Sludge Wave if you wanted to as well. Tons of cool options there as well. Zacian could be fun. Terrapagos is interesting as well, right? You don't necessarily beat the restricteds, the fighting type restricteds, like with Eternatus, but you also at least don't take big damage from them. So that could be a cool combination there as well. I think Cali Shadow is just generally... Cali Shadow is that restricted you can kind of put on any core and say this is going to work. You know, any Pokemon that I mentioned today, you could probably put beside Cali Shadow and have success with. You know, I don't love the concept of this core, but like in theory, it doesn't look terrible, right? Like Cali Shadow doesn't like the cycle game, right? So if I can find a way to break through the instant Rillaboom cycle, you know, Eternatus wants to break through that instant Rillaboom cycle, right? So I think there's an option there. Definitely tons of options. Interesting Pokemon to try out for sure. I don't know how well it's actually going to perform, but I think it's definitely something that needed to be talked about moving forward. I am going to group the last 3 together just because I think they all have that same problem. And now the problem of each of them is different, but I think it's the same. The overall concept of the problem is that they just don't do anything effectively. And that's going to come off in a little bit weird, but let me explain myself. Like, they don't effectively break the metagame. They don't actually support your team in the meta. They're great Pokemon. They have great tools, and they do cool things. They just don't actively, I don't think they, like, progress your board state as well. Obviously, with the Rayquaza, you know, you're probably going to hit those extreme speeds, the Terra Normal, right? And I think that's very, very strong in general. And I think that's all it is. It doesn't have that, yeah, this piece breaks X, X, and Y, you know, it doesn't break those cores. It doesn't do anything. It's a very strong option, right? Terra Normal, E-Speed. Very, very strong option. But outside of that, like, it doesn't really break any specific cores. Like, back in the day, Rayquaza was great because you have that weather control with Airlock. You don't necessarily need that anymore. It doesn't really break any huge cores. It does give Koraidon and Kyogre problems, of course. However, outside of that, it's all it is an extreme speed bot, right? So it's very tough to find its spot in the metagame. However, what I could definitely see from Rayquaza is, like, you know, either that Choice Band, Terra Normal, E-Speed stuff. And I think you're going to want to see that beside, like, a Calyrex Shadow, right? Calyrex Shadow, Rayquaza, just put on big pressure from Rayquaza on one end, and then, you know, with E-Speed, you can kind of chip everything down. Calyrex Shadow comes in, cleans up. Or you do it the other way, Calyrex Shadow chips everything down, and then Rayquaza cleans up the end game. I definitely see that, but what I feel like is holding it back, and it's the same problem with everything, it just, outside of that, like, that's a concept, right? It does that concept well, but does that actually fit into the metagame in its current state? And I think the answer is unfortunately no. But that concept, if it ever works, and if it can ever find that niche, it would probably be a pretty decent Pokemon. I don't think it's winning regionals, but I do think there's a chance for it, right? And you're going to see why these Pokemon are all grouped together, right? It does that normal E-Speed very, very well. It's a pretty good mon when it does that, but that in itself doesn't really progress anything. It doesn't really match up well. Same with Kyurem and Palkia, right? Kyurem in this case, you know, it has that 170 special attack stat. It has that Blizzard spam capability, but outside of that, that's what it is. It's just a Blizzard spam Pokemon that, in terms of the metagame right now, where almost every team currently has Wide Guard, it doesn't do much. Yeah, it does this very well, right? It does this very well, whether it's a Choice Specs or a Life Orb or a Choice Scarf, right? It does these Blizzard spam options very, very well in that snow. But in terms of actually matching up into the metagame, it doesn't. It's just there. This is what it does, you know? Which is great if something like that ever has a niche and the metagame ever opens up for it. But outside of that, it just doesn't fit into the meta, in my opinion. And same with the Palkia, is like, hey, Water Dragon is phenomenal. This typing is one of the best typings in the game, in my opinion, right? And you also get ridiculous coverage on top of that, right? You're getting your Spatial Rend, you're getting your Hydro Pump, and you're getting whatever coverage you want, whether it's Thunder, whether it's Flamethrower, whether it's Aura Sphere like the Dialga wants to use, right? Like, there's so many options here. I would almost say Chilling Water is good on Palkia, strictly because I don't want to miss Hydro Pump, right? But long story short, there is so many moves and so many options that Palkia can use. It's amazing, but the problem is you miss. Your moves are so inconsistent that your upside goes down quite a bit. You don't have the same upside as a Kyogre, right? Like something like a Kyogre, yeah, Origin Pulse misses, it sucks. Zacian, Play Rough, it misses, it sucks. But the upside of hitting those moves is just so much higher than the upside of Palkia hitting its move. Yeah, they hit pretty hard, but that's pretty much where it ends, right? You don't see Palkia being like, yeah, this is a fantastic piece in this position. It's gonna just sit here and do what it needs to do. It doesn't, right? It doesn't really match up. There's no real spot in the metagame, at least currently, where I'm like, yeah, I want a Palkia. Palkia solves my problems with this other Pokemon, with this restricted Pokemon, right? Like a lot of the times it's like, yo, Terapagos. Well, Cali Shadow is surprisingly good with Terapagos because I'm scared of the common Zamazentas when I use Terapagos, right? To me, I see that. That's a line I see. Palkia, I don't have that. Normally it's like, oh, I'm scared of Kyogre, so boom, Palkia becomes one. But I don't know if Kyogre's at that point in the metagame where it needs to be, oh, a Palkia angle, right? Where I'm risking missing my moves to have a better Kyogre matchup. I think there's other ways to have a better Kyogre matchup nowadays. So I don't know if Palkia really sees that. Still very good Pokemon. Very good at what they do. I just don't think they actually match up into the metagame. And that's kind of why they're all grouped together here. You can probably make usage of them, right? Like Palkia, Cali, Ice saw usage in the past, right? That secondary Trick Room setter. Pretty decent typing synergy with the Cali Ice in the past. We saw that a lot. But a lot of that was made up for, like, its accuracy was made up for by the Dynamax. We don't have that anymore, right? So does it still see usage? Is it still decent? Going to be tough to say. I don't think it matches up well into the top, but it could be a fun piece. Kyurem, it clicks Blizzard. It clicks Blizzard very, very well. It does get Turbo Blaze, which is a very cool ability. And you get very good coverage in, like, Earth Power, Fire moves as well. Obviously, Dragon hits pretty hard as well. But, like, outside of that 170 stat, you don't have a lot going for you, right? Like, you do that one thing very, very well. If you find that spot into the metagame, it's solid. If you don't, well, then you're kind of just that niche pick on the outside that may see usage because, haha, Blizzard spam, funny, 170 special attack, very good. Same with the Rayquaza, right? Like, it doesn't inherently break things, but it does do that Terra Normal E-Speed job very, very well. And I think if you can kind of leverage these niches on proper teams, I think you can probably get somewhere with them. That's why I wanted to give all three of them a shout out here. And they're just kind of those pieces that do one thing very well. And if you can fit them on the team, then you're solid, right? And that's kind of how I would approach this. You really want to be taking advantage of Rayquaza and its E-Speed. You want to be taking Kyurem and its Blizzard, and you want to be taking Palkia and that coverage, and this. You really want to take advantage of the Water Dragon typing, and I think that's what Palkia does best. And as dumb as that sounds, its best feature is that typing, right? So you really want to be trying to utilize that. Pressure, Telepathy, same thing with the Dialga. We went over it earlier. Overall, cool concept. Like Palkia Miraidon maybe could be fun. I don't know why I keep trying to throw things in with Miraidon. It seems cool. You don't really like Rillaboom. Don't pull Rillaboom if you're gonna run Palkia Miraidon. But you do break the ground types that Miraidon doesn't like with the Palkia, which could be fun. So that could be some sort of cool concept, and then you still get to do like the discharge stuff because you could be Telepathy. Long story short, I'm rambling now, guys. That's gonna pretty much do it for the video, and I hope you guys kind of like this concept where I was just kind of throwing out ideas. I wanted to make this video a little bit more natural and kind of go along with kind of like the natural flow, see what kind of sparked as my brain kind of flowed as I was looking at some of these Pokemon. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this type of content, a little bit different than like the hard find, like, yeah, this is really good because XYZ, right? It was kind of more of a natural flow. Hopefully that's something that kind of clicks with you guys. Hopefully I gave you guys some ideas. Maybe I sparked some ideas with you as well. But with that, thank you all so much for watching. If you do enjoy this type of content, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. It really does help with the channel. And of course, I really do appreciate it. But with that, I'm going to get on out of here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will catch you all in a future video.